We get football in Death Valley on Saturday, and even if it's just a spring game, it's football nonetheless. But there will be a long guest list of 4s and 5 stars across the country coming to visit LSU for the spring game. Who is it? We'll break it down on today's edition of Locked On LSU.
You are Locked On LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked On LSU podcast. Thank you for making us your first listen every single day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts. And today's edition of Locked On LSU is brought to you by LinkedIn. Just like all of our recruiting coverage is brought to you by LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. So that's why LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. We've got the spring game coming up on Saturday, and it's going to be a good opportunity to kind of get a peek behind the curtain of what the 2024 squad is shaping up to look like. But it's also a great opportunity for Brian Kelly and this entire team to show off Tiger Stadium and to bring in a bunch of 4 and 5 stars from across the country and a nice recruiting weekend. So joining us now to break it all down is Locked On's official recruiting insider, Brian Smith. Brian, appreciate your time. How are we doing?
Doing well. It is the fun time of year again. We got football in some capacity and lots of recruiting between now and early July. So it's my kind of deal.
Football is football, whether it's spring football, whether it's UFL football. No disrespect to the UFL, but we'll take it. If it's pigskin on the grass, I'll take it. We've got a long list of recruits that will be in Baton Rouge this weekend. There's also a list of recruits that you and I have been talking about that won't be in Baton Rouge this weekend. I'll let you choose. What are we going to start with?
Well, since I like to see you smile, we're going to talk about a defensive tackle that they
definitely. All right. I will take any and all defensive tackles that would like to come to Baton Rouge.
Zion Williams, defensive lineman from Lufkin, Texas. It's a very prominent program. He's a kid that can pretty much go where he wants because of his size. National top 300 kid. He's a little raw, but I mean, like the first visit he scheduled was Texas. That tells you something. 6'4", 295, LSU, Texas, and the usual suspects are after him. Getting him back on campus, he's been before, is very big. I'm sure LSU and Bo Davis are going to try to get him, especially it's kind of personal with Bo and all these guys, they come over from these different staffs. But I'm curious. I'm really curious. How quickly can they get at least one good defensive tackle in the fold? Because they need at least two. I talked to somebody close to LSU today, and he even brought it up. He's like, I'm concerned about defensive tackle. And I'm like, you don't say. I know somebody else that's an LSU fan that mentions that to me quite often. It's so ironic that you mentioned that.
No, duh, it's a concern.
So they can't do much about this next season, but the one after, getting kids like this matters. And they're still looking at a couple other kids in state. I got a whole bunch of notes of different kids and everything, but you can't teach 295.
Yeah.
Can't teach 295. So that's one kid that got
especially 295 for an incoming senior in high school.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like he'll walk in with the prerequisite size to play in the Southeastern Conference, which is pretty rare. Chad Woolfolk, LSU, TCU, Texas Tech. He's a defensive end. Could be somebody that kind of comes over as well from Texas. That's another guy to kind of keep in mind. But LSU's just in general, like the whole visit weekend is tremendous. They've got offensive players, defensive players that are really, really good. But Zion's the one I figured you wanted to hear about first.
That is, I will always take any and all positive defensive tackle news. If you have negative defensive tackle news at this point, save it because I don't even want to hear it. I've heard enough.
I don't have any negative defensive tackle news.
So. That's good news, at least for now. And of course, I'm sure you expect, we all expect LSU to address defensive tackle in the spring transfer portal window. But like you and I talked about, the guys that you get in the spring transfer portal window, if they can be good depth pieces for you, then that's really how I view the ceiling. But it's guys like a Zion Williams that's Brian Kelly's, number one priority at this point. It's bringing them in through high school. It's the quote unquote homegrown kind of guys that you bring in, that you get commitments from, and then you develop them throughout their 3, 4 to 5 years at LSU, ideally.
Yeah, that never changes. LSU unfortunately lost to two kids last year, and they've already got a half dozen or so top guys in state committed for this next class. It's just not the greatest year for interior defensive linemen. There's a few kids like the Wolford kid, the bringing from Texas, etc. But it's just not a good D-line group in the state. It's one of the poorer ones in quite a while. Once every 10 years, there's a year like this, but it is what it is. So they're making do.
Like the locusts. It's biblical. Once every 10 to 15 years, you're due for a pretty bad either defensive tackle class or wide receiver class, whatever it might be. Before we get into the specifics of the invite list, because you mentioned it's a solid list, just overall looking at it, what does it mean to get these guys in specifically for the spring game over any other weekend in the spring?
Well, if you can get them there all at the same time, they all meet with each other and they get to know each other better. Most of them know each other in some capacity, but like Mario Nash is coming. He's a kid that I talked to his dad the other day. He's from Mississippi. He's one of the best linemen in the country. He could have went to any other place this weekend. He's coming to LSU. So that's a good sign. Harlem Berry is going to be there. They got a few kids that some people may not know as much about. What they just offered JT Lindsay, a running back out of Alexandria, who I really, really like. That's a kid that's going to get probably a better look. I'm sure he'll try to come back down this weekend. These are a variety of things, like guys that have been there a half dozen times. Like Harlem's probably been to LSU 20 times. He only lives down in New Orleans, but they have to meet everybody, and it continues to build the relationship. So it is important. And if they're not on your campus, they're at Texas, they're at Alabama, they're at Ole Miss, they're at Texas A&M. So there's that side of the equation as well.
You mentioned Harlem will be there. Bryce Underwood will be there as well. It's probably his fifth or sixth time back in Baton Rouge. Keylan Moses will be there as well.
Right.
So, and this is something that you and I have talked about before also, but I'll reiterate it here. Just your thoughts on the importance of having those guys that are already committed.
Well, they're going to help Brian and the rest of the staff commit to getting these kids to come and make their decision and get this over with. I'm sure there's going to be some pressure applied. Like Solomon Thomas is going to be there this weekend. He's arguably the best interior offensive lineman in the country. He's from Jacksonville, but he's committed to Florida State. There's a really heated battle between FSU, LSU, and Florida going on. Miami's involved a little bit too, but Florida State is kind of worried about LSU in this visit. Like he's an NFL player.
Yeah.
You get those kind of guys on campus, that's good news. They also have Khalil Lockett. He's a kid out of the greater Dallas area. He could fly. He's another big-time receiver. He's going to be on campus. I've seen him play before. That's not a guy you want to have to put somebody one-on-one with. He could smoke you. They just keep bringing in top-notch guys, and it's all over the country. So having the committed kids with them, that's going to help.
Let's get more into that guest list. The players, I mentioned Harlem Berry and Keylan Moses and Bryce Underwood, some names that LSU fans have become familiar with. But what about some names that maybe LSU fans aren't as familiar with? Uncommitted players that'll be there this weekend. We'll get into that coming up next with Brian Smith. All right, I want to tell you about FanDuel. It's playoff time in the NBA, and we are almost there in the NHL. Plus, baseball's in full swing, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every single game. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets, guaranteed. That's $150, win or lose. You can bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, all on an app that is safe, secure, and so easy to use. So if you're looking in the NHL, because we're just a few days, just about a week or so removed from the Stanley Cup playoffs. So are you looking for an NHL bet to place before we get into the playoffs? I look at the Dallas Stars. That team is playing red freaking hot. They're a candidate to win the President's Trophy. And I think that they're going to want to finish this season out with a bang. So what are you waiting for? That's my take. Do it how you want to do it. Just do it with FanDuel. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, rolling along here on Locked On LSU. Spring game this weekend. It's a great recruiting opportunity for Brian Kelly and this entire coaching staff. And we're breaking it all down with Brian Smith. And of course, today's edition of Locked On LSU is brought to you by LinkedIn. You mentioned Khalil Lockett, a 5-star receiver. He was at Texas this past weekend. There's two stories about the receivers. This is the good side of the story. That you get Khalil Lockett in for a visit. What do you know about him, and how big of a priority would it be to get Khalil Lockett committed?
He's a national top 10 receiver. And with his deep speed, I think he's a priority for any school that can get him on campus.
Mm-hmm.
He's a kid that can go play at Texas, Oklahoma, Alabama, or anywhere else he'd go. So he's the kind of kid that LSU fans are used to seeing in Death Valley.
Mm-hmm.
He's a guy that has NFL aspirations, and I've seen him play against the best of the best and put on a show. So, yeah, he's a kid that could play early. And if you put him next to Underwood, yeah, that would be a pretty impressive combination. And they've already set the floor with a lot of other visits, Jamie French, et cetera. So they're doing quite fine at receiver.
They're doing fine at receiver. And one thing that I've noticed, Khalil Lockett has a strong relationship with Cortez Hankton, co-offensive coordinator, was the passing game coordinator and wide receivers coach this past season. We talk a lot about Corey Raymond and how he's kind of that recruiting force multiplier, how he's an expert relationship builder. I don't think we talk enough about Cortez Hankton and his ability to recruit the wide receiver position. From a recruiting standpoint, beyond just a coaching standpoint, kind of what do you know about the relationships that he's been able to build at that position specifically?
Well, it's pretty amazing because like French, DeCorian Moore, Lockett, several kids around the state of Louisiana, whether seniors this fall or juniors, there's a few juniors as well, have been there multiple times, or they've set a visit, or both. And I can't say it enough. You can't have these kids on your campus enough times. And LSU has arguably the best class in the country right now. A big part of that is Hankton. He's putting in effort. That's what it's about. It's about relationships. It's about building the opportunities to get to know these young men over time. And the more times they're in front of you, especially on campus in Death Valley, the better chance you have to get them. So he deserves a big pat on the back.
The other side of that, I said there was a good part of the story with the wide receivers, maybe a not so great part of the story with the wide receivers. DeCorian Moore will be at Ohio State this weekend. He won't be at LSU's spring game. He is committed to LSU, but as you and I and everybody else listening knows, that's really kind of means nothing to a certain extent. What should the worry level be for LSU fans and DeCorian Moore continuing to take some more of these visits?
Well, I'm very concerned because Ohio State's the easiest sell for receivers over the last decade.
Right.
LSU's probably the second easiest, but he's got Texas after him hard. And then there's a unique twist. His dad is the head coach, or Rashad Samples just got hired at Oregon. His dad is the head coach at Duncanville where DeCorian goes. And Oregon's also involved with him. Rashad Samples is one of the best young coaches, college or pro. He's been in the NFL already as a 26-year-old. He was an NFL coach. So this is a very complex recruitment because DeCorian's conservatively a top 20 player nationally. I mean, he can fly. So I wouldn't put my money on any one particular team right now. I know he's committed to LSU, but I don't put a lot of water in that right now.
Was that the receiver that you and I were talking about off air? That was the one that you didn't have great news for me.
Yeah, I don't like that trend right there. He's all over the place. So that could go a lot of different directions, not named LSU.
Not what I love to hear. But I will say at the receiver position, let's say take DeCorian Moore out of the equation. Let's say he does end up going to Oregon, or, he gets wooed and wowed by the very storied history of receivers at Ohio State. How would you feel about the current state of the receiver room and receiver recruiting if he does decide to, in fact, decommit from LSU?
Well, I mean, they always seem to have a kid that's a sophomore, junior that kind of steps up. Last year it was Thomas. Lacey's that guy now. I guess he's turned into a true number one. And he was pretty good into last year, but he was just on a deep roster of receivers. So I'm not real worried there. But at the same time, you just can't lose 5-star receivers.
Yeah.
That hurts. So there's two ways to look at that. But at the same time, there's more receivers to go out and get. Like losing, if they'd gotten a defensive tackle commitment and lost it, that's far harder to replace because there just aren't as many of them.
Yeah.
I would take the receiver off my board before I would take the defensive tackle. It's just math. So that's one way to look at it. But they may get DeCorian, but I would not put any money on that.
Putting money on any 16, 17-year-old.
Yeah, that's not a good idea.
Not a very good idea. I would not recommend that. But coming up next, I do kind of see a trend. A couple of names that you mentioned in the first segment, and a long list of players at this specific position that I noticed being a trend, being at LSU's spring game this upcoming weekend. I want to break that down with Brian coming up next. All right, I want to tell you about Game Time. So Game Time is actually, honestly, the very first place that I go when I look to buy tickets. I went to the Braves game this past week. It was Braves opening day, and it was an absolute blast. I was in Atlanta for a wedding, and I thought I want to go to the Braves game. So let me check Game Time to find tickets. I found great prices on the tickets that I wanted, and it was such an easy price. It was such an easy process. So Game Time is now an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets even faster and easier, and I can personally attest to that. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. So if you're a little bit of a procrastinator like I am, then hey, Game Time is the place for you. There's last minute deals as well. So you can save up to 60% off by buying last minute tickets for sports. And it's not just Major League Baseball. It's not just sports or games. It's also concerts, it's comedy events, it's theater events, plays, musicals, you name it. They've got it on the Game Time app. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege, LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right, rolling along here, Locked On LSU. We're just a few days away from LSU's spring game. Finally, some football at Tiger Stadium. A long list of recruits that are expected to be at the spring game this upcoming weekend. But Brian, you mentioned a couple of players at the specific position group, and I think it's only scratching the surface of the long list of players at this position that will be there. It's the interior offensive line. You mentioned 4-star Mario Nash. You mentioned Solomon Thomas, a 5-star, one of the top offensive line recruits in the country, who's committed to Florida State, but, commitments giveth and taketh away. And, LSU could be one that could take it away. And 4-star Devin Harper, an interior offensive lineman, will be at LSU this weekend, in addition to several other offensive linemen. What do you make of that? And what do you make of those specific players?
Number one, there's some elite talent. Number two, Brian Kelly, when he was at Notre Dame, built the program through O-line, and he really started to do that last year at LSU. Mm-hmm. And while everybody talks about Jaden and he was tremendous and all that, the offensive line moved a lot of big guys out of the way so Jaden had options. And that's the key. I mean, I think this fall, it'd be almost impossible to say somebody has a better tackle combination than these two tackles. I think they're both good enough to possibly turn pro after this year.
Yeah.
So it's easy to sell, and I'm sure they're bringing that up, and I'm sure they're going to keep pounding that point home. Hey, we put guys in the league. We've got a great run game, great pass game. Come to LSU. It's not a hard sell.
Yeah.
But that's where they're trying to get better than they already were. And I think that's smart. You could never rest on your laurels. O-line recruiting has been important to Kelly at Notre Dame, and it's there at LSU too, and that should help the program.
And it's one thing that it doesn't matter what year it is. It doesn't matter how much the game evolves. You need to be able to protect. Like, you need to be able to create holes in the run game. It doesn't matter if we're, transforming into a more pass-heavy league. The offensive line is important. And I think that's an underrated force multiplier for LSU going into this season, is how much continuity you have in the offensive line.
Yeah, and that's more important. And I'm not picking on him, but while Nussmeier's a good quarterback, mm-hmm. his escapability is not going to be like Houdini, who just went to the NFL.
Yeah, right.
So there's more pressure that's going to be on him to not only escape pressure when it's there, but to make the correct line. Like Jaden would screw up royally and still make yards. Mm-hmm. Things that Brian Kelly can't teach. Nussmeier's not going to be able to do that.
Right.
So they have to be in sync with the offensive line and him making the right call. They're going to come after him mm-hmm. because they have so many skill guys. I would blitz the hell out of him, and that's usually the norm with a young player, and see what happens. But at the same time, he is good, and he's got guys like Lacey out there that can go get it. So I'm curious to see what they do early in the season. I mean, they got SC right out the gate in Las Vegas. So maybe that works out in their favor and they get tested and they get through it. But that's going to be really interesting because you've got to have it. You got to have that offensive play every year.
You have to have it every year, and it's even one of those things that I look at and say, okay, you have so much continuity offensively. You have a lot of depth offensively. Can you score enough points to give the defense some time to figure things out? Because we heard from Blake Baker earlier this week, and he was talking about how, Harold Perkins in this new role, it's just going to take reps. It's going to take time. Well, you don't have a lot of time. You're not afforded a whole lot of reps to be able to figure things out. But unless your offense is scoring 50 points a game, maybe you do have some time to figure things out.
What I read about Harold, and I looked into it because I know you're very curious about where he's lining up, is they're going to play him on third downs on the edge quite a bit, which I'm okay with. But I'm still worried that the fact of the matter is they're not deep enough at inside linebacker. They can't move him to edge 80% of the time. Mm-hmm. That's not good. And I know they're saying all the right things, but I never believe any coach in spring practice whatsoever. Injuries, play calls, nothing, zero. So, and Brian Kelly is not known to be the most truthful guy with that stuff anyway. So how well is he adapting to it, and how much are they really going to send him after guys instead of playing in zone like he did last year, looking like a deer in headlights? Mm-hmm. That's what I want to know. And they're not going to tell me anything.
And that's my question is what gives me reassurance that what didn't work last year didn't work so much that you just moved him from that position after one single game. What should give me encouragement that it's going to work this year?
Well, I mean, he's a third-year player, and he's allegedly embraced it. I need to see that.
You can say that and all. That's great.
I don't. Yeah, if I had a private conversation with him, it'd be one thing. I'm not going to believe anything he says into a microphone. Mm-hmm. He's taught what to say and what not to say. So that's part of the world we live. But at the same time, he's so physically gifted, they can't take him off the field. And as usual, LSU's got some pretty good edge guys, so they don't need him there as much. It's just that's his best spot. It's not debatable. So it's kind of a conundrum. Like running back, they're thin. He could probably play that too if you wanted him to.
Played it in high school.
Yeah, I know. So he is a very unique piece on the chessboard. So I hope they figure it out for him and for college football fans like me in general. Not an LSU fan, but I like watching Harold play. And it's better when he's chasing instead of dropping into coverage. That's not his game.
It's easy to put lipstick on a pig in April. I think it's easy to talk things up in April and talk yourself into things working out. And once we get to September, we'll see if there's any validity to that. Any more tidbits from the recruits or the visits or anything that you're hearing on the transfer portal front?
Well, there's one, the James Simon kid. I don't know where he's going to end up. That's the other one. Mm-hmm. I know he's visiting Texas. I know Alabama's a threat. I know he's visiting Notre Dame. I'm starting to think that the offer that they made to JT Lindsay, who again, I tagged you today on Twitter with him. Yeah. He's really good. I think LSU's like, okay, if you want to come, that's great, but we're kind of done waiting. Simon's out of the Shreveport area. He's an every down back. He's a really good football player, but he's, for whatever reason, he just wants to look around. Mm-hmm. So sometimes you got to cut bait if you got another good player. Like Lindsay's good. It is what it is. I don't know what Brian Kelly can do, because they've had him on campus several times. Even like Sonny Ship doesn't even know where the kid's going to go. Yeah. It's not a good sign because he pretty much lives in Brian's office the way he knows everything that's going on. I'm curious to see where he goes because like Texas, Alabama, Notre Dame, he has all the right offers. That'd probably be a hard decision to make. So we'll see. There's a few other defensive linemen they're kind of kicking the tires on. I'll know more in the next couple of weeks, but it's a long way until December.
Sonny Ship's report, I saw basically they felt good about the conversations that they had with him, but didn't feel great or anything definitive one way or another.
I think that's why conversation ended. Right. That's why they offered JT. There's no doubt in my mind. They're like, okay, we need two backs because they are thin at running back, which is really weird for LSU. But they got to have two backs in this class, and they don't want the ship to sail on the other kid while they're waiting on Simon.
Can't wait around forever.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with it. If he ends up at Alabama, that would sting. But I've heard that's a major threat.
It always does. Whenever they go there, it always just it's salt in the wound. It's not just not getting the player; it's having to play against that player for now.
That's exactly right.
Foreseeable future.
That's right.
Brian, you are the very best. Where can the people find some more of your work?
At FBScout_Florida on X. Right now, it's a little bit of everything, just watching a lot of film. And I'm hoping that there's more news from the Bayou and some of the surrounding areas with official visits coming up Texas has a huge weekend. I know you just love the Longhorns,
Love
and
them.
their recruiting visit list coming up is insane. So I'm kind of curious to see who goes back and forth, because those two schools are battling for a ton of kids. Who commits and who doesn't this weekend between LSU and Texas is a big deal.
It's going to be a big deal this weekend. Several spring games across the SEC are going down. I know Ole Miss has theirs this upcoming weekend. I know Texas does as well. So we'll keep an eye on it. Transfer portal officially opens next week. So with the latest transfer portal news, we'll be the first person that we talk to.
Thank you very much, Care.
All right, Brian, appreciate you.
Take care.